Good evening, everyone, and happy Friday. I'm Mayor Pro Tem Tasha Harper-Madison, proud City Council member for District 1 in East and Northeast Austin. Welcome to another edition of our bi-weekly live stream, Talk with Tasha. We're coming to you every 2 weeks with critical conversations about the issues that matter most to you. According to the U.S. Census, there are nearly 200,000 residents in Austin who aren't quite 18 years old. That's equivalent to the entire population of places like Little Rock, Arkansas, Salt Lake City, Utah. Those kids are growing up in real time, and the education and environment that are currently shaping them will have long-lasting impacts on the direction they take as they enter adulthood. From cradle to college, we have a social obligation to nurture the younger generations that will inherit the community we ourselves inherited from those who came before us. But like so much else, all that is easier said than done. Things like institutional racism, generational poverty, food deserts, housing located in environmentally compromised areas, and continued disinvestment in educational opportunities. All these and more add up to create huge equity obstacles that make for a feedback loop of misery and marginalized communities. Austin is soaking in opportunity, but that opportunity is out of reach for far too many residents and their children, especially in the Eastern Crescent. Luckily, there are plenty of people working on it, including well-established advocacy groups that are leveraging connections in the community to make sure that families have the support that they need. Later in the show, we'll hear from the United Way for Greater Austin and the African American Youth Harvest Foundation about a broad coalition working to empower kids from the very start of their journeys. But first, we can't talk about education without having an educator in the mix. So we've invited one of the best in the game onto the show to talk about her expertise, as well as her experience dealing with the additional challenges of the pandemic. She's the principal of Round Rock ISD's Wells Branch Elementary Arts Integration Academy, as well as founder of Educators in Solidarity, a group of anti-racist advocates in the teaching space. And on top of all that, she's also the District 1 appointee to the city's Early Childhood Education Commission. In other words, Eliza Gordon is coming into this conversation just bubbling past the brim with ideas and experiences. And I couldn't be more proud and happy to have you on the show today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
It's awesome. I'm sorry, I think I cut you off. I was too excited.
Oh, no, I was just saying I'm honored to be here.
Oh, great. Well, so, I want to make sure that everybody gets to hear all the cool stuff that you're up to and gets to have the advantage of your perspective. Before the show, folks didn't get to see it, but my baby got to dip in and say hi, because we have had the honor of knowing you in your professional capacity as her vice principal at her elementary school. So I'm really happy to have you be able to tell the folks that are listening in what it is that your experiences are looking like these days and how it's different from what it was before. And one of the questions I really want to ask you, I know parents are all wondering, this lost year, I've heard a few folks call it, what are going to be the long lasting impacts? But, I'll get to that later. I think first, if you could just tell us about your experiences so far on the Early Childhood Council, and then what drove you to this role? What have you learned? What have you accomplished?
Sure. I will say that, the Early Childhood Council has been such a learning opportunity for me. I had been already in education for probably 8 years at that point when I started. I remember the phone call that we had when you asked me, do I know anyone who's passionate about early childhood education to serve on this commission? I know how busy you are. And I was like, oh, I want to do this. I really feel like I have learned so much just about the inner workings of the city of Austin that I had honestly no idea about. Later, you were just mentioning that we're going to hear from several of the greater coalitions across the city that are working to support early childhood education. And even as a highly qualified educator in the public school system in Texas, that was the kind of support across the city that I did not know existed, and really didn't know how to connect my families with at the time. So I've really learned so much about what we have to offer across the city, and what the challenges are in accessing those things for families too.
Right. And we recognize that, like I said, before, a lot of these challenges were present prior to the pandemic, prior to the devastating ice storm, but right. The pandemic really has been tough on everybody, particularly parents, our students and our educators. What's your takeaway with, your sort of boots on the ground assessment of what are the needs and really what's our resource capacity as more and more adults are, getting the vaccines?
Yeah, it's this crazy combination of like hopefulness and also like people are at their wits' end. Parents feel that way. Teachers definitely feel that way. It's been a tough school year. And I know our kids feel that way too. And I think that it's so important in terms of thinking about capacity to remember. We've been talking about this a lot at my school. My staff probably laughs every time I say this now, that it's so important to remember to have grace with yourself and with your kids, and with our families, right? And that grace doesn't just expire because more people are getting vaccinated, and there's this kind of feeling that there's hope coming, because we've been experiencing this for a really long time, and the long-lasting effects of that in and of itself is a lived trauma experience for folks. And so that really does take a toll on all of the stakeholders in the education system. Right now, I think what that looks like is like, it's okay to take a break over the summer. It's okay, even thinking about, and I know we'll probably get there later, but thinking about what, the concept of loss, of learning loss might really scare folks.
Yeah.
You also really have to take care of yourself as parents, as students, and as educators, to ensure that we can all meet everybody's needs when we come back in the fall. That's one thing I'm highly concerned about. And so I really think that taking inventory now to say, like, we're gonna end strong this school year, and we're going to take a break. It's okay to do that.
I really appreciate that perspective. It's very helpful, especially when it feels like, everything feels like so much pressure, Yeah. And, in addition to education in general, there are some other elements of, that cyclical poverty, a part of that cycle. So from the digital divide to working parents who really struggle with childcare, we have heard a lot about the disproportionate impacts that the pandemic has had on families, that were already living in the margins. Are there any weaknesses or inequities that weren't talked about much? I know I certainly recognize, by way of our constituents reaching out and asking for certain things, that we didn't even think about, and so I just wonder if there are some gaps that need to be filled that you were able to witness by being, front and center.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, one of the things that in the conversation around childcare and early childhood education that I think became so apparent so quickly is how many people, every person who has a child, depends on our public schools, or everyone who sends children to public schools or childcare centers, depends on that institution to be able to make our economy function. And the equity piece that is kind of spun throughout that is that there are people that don't have a choice there, and that did not have a choice throughout the entirety of the pandemic of whether or not they reported to work. Right. But their options for childcare were eliminated. Right. And so the kind of emergency situations for safety for kids, because there were no options, right? Like where do we put all of our kids that when we all have to report to work? And also our childcare workers are essential, right? Where they bring their children. And so the kind of like interconnectedness of not having systemically valued education before or childcare workers before has, led us to this place of, oh, well, all of a sudden, when we really need them, we didn't have the systems in place to support them, to support us. And I think, it's been said a million times how quickly so many people pivoted and changed systems and moved mountains really to make all sorts of different things happen virtually, school included. And I one of the things that I keep thinking about though is how many folks had to move their own personal mountains to be able to continue to get a paycheck and figure out what to do with their families, their small children, while all of that happened and while everyone else was moving the school system mountains,
Right.
I think that's one thing that we've been, and the second that we could open up our doors to children in person, we had a lot of kids come back because there were a lot of families that needed their children to be back in the building.
Right.
And that's, I think, something really important to keep in mind in the conversation of choice. It's not always a choice, right?
Right. You go ahead. I'm sorry, my daughter was trying to decide whether or not she could walk behind me. Well, all of that is just so impactful. And I think, for folks who are living it, they already know. But I think a lot of folks sort of outside of the, directly impacted households really have to hear it in order to understand, the complexity of it and how we as a community can help support folks. And you touched on it briefly earlier. You talked about learning loss, prior to you saying something that really struck me. You said there's no expiration on grace, or grace doesn't expire. I really appreciate that because I just keep thinking about all the parents who are struggling, with their kids who haven't quite acclimated to virtual school, or for whatever reason, they don't have enough devices for everybody to go to school. And, I had heard these tales along the way of moms who were, doing a staggered approach to their kids going to school, or, just all the challenges that people have been experiencing, and recognizing that even families that are, otherwise very much considered privileged, relatively, even our kids are struggling, And so I think a lot about how long do you think the impact of this will last? And do we have a complete sense of the scale of disruption, or is the smoke really still clearing here? Yeah,
I think we don't have a sense of that yet. I really lean on my background in and a lot of training that I'm doing right now with my school and my staff in the science of teaching reading and early literacy practices, and thinking about the base of early literacy and when that happens for kids. And you think about, and our early childhood council has really been, especially this week, the week of the young child, thinking about pre-K registration. This year, we are way down across the whole state in pre-K registration. And I see that in my school. We see that in our district. We see that across the state. And if you just follow that cohort of kids, this potential group of students who, for whatever reason, families chose not to send them to school for pre-K because of whatever, it was, and virtual pre-K, like, imagine, I know families that are doing that right now, but it's difficult. And then if you are not comfortable sending your child, then you're just going to wait till kindergarten. So that cohort of kids, it's, they're going to be in elementary school for 5 years. So seeing the ramifications or the impact, I guess, on that group of kids throughout the course of their elementary years, I think the whole purpose that for pre-K is to grow our kiddos based on the research that we have and how meaningful and impactful or that early childhood education can be. And now we know so many folks missed out on that opportunity based on the pandemic. And so I know that we will feel the impact. But one thing that I really am trying to reframe in my own thinking, and with really anyone who will listen to me, is changing the language from learning loss to student needs. Learning loss is such a deficit mindset, and our language affects our thinking, affects how we are going to interact with our kids, and our students.
Use it in context. Use student needs. Like, how would you say that?
Sure. So our students always come to school with needs. In any classroom, I could have a wide range of student needs. Let's think about reading. I could have a range of readers in my first grade class, some who read on a first grade level, some who read above first grade level, and some who are not quite reading on level yet. And it's my job as the teacher to meet their needs and grow them from where they are. And now we are still doing that job. We just might have a wider range of needs. We might have new needs that we've never met in first grade before because that's not what we've expected before. And we might have to sharpen our tools differently to meet every student's needs. But that is technically our job still, right? Like, that's always been our job. And I think that if we frame it as meeting students' needs, it shifts the way that we approach. And it changes to a much more asset-based thinking approach where, like, I've got kids that have learned so many other wonderful skills at home for the year and have adapted to some incredibly tough situations and gained incredible experience in different ways. And sure, we're going to have to meet some other needs, maybe in, numeracy and literacy, but we can do that. We know how to do that.
Right. Oh, I wish we could keep talking, but we got even more good stuff coming. So I'm going to have to tell you good night and happy Friday, and hope you have a really good weekend. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us. And frankly, thank you for your service. We really appreciate you.
Thank you
very much. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you. So good to see you and talk with you.
So good to see you. Of course, Wills Branch Elementary Arts and Integration Academy Principal and District 1 appointee to the Early Childhood Council, Eliza Gordon. I really appreciate that she was able to join us tonight. And we're going to move in to our next guest. So Success by Six. That's the snappy name of a broad campaign driven by the United Way of Greater Austin. The idea is to make sure that the resources are there for every sprout that shoots through the ground in our community. The effort involves a broad coalition, including the African American Youth Harvest Foundation, whose mission is to provide hands-on service through school and community-based programs to enhance the quality of life for African American and low-income youth and families. This collaboration is the product of the understanding that diverse communities need tailor-made, targeted approaches. Joining me now to talk about Success by Six and other critical issues adjacent to it are Brooke Freeland from the United Way and Mr. Michael Lofton, CEO of the African American Youth Foundation. Hi, y'all.
Hello, how you doing? I'm enjoying everything so far.
Awesome. Doing real well. I really appreciate that y'all were able to join us this evening, and I hope the folks that are tuning in leave with really good information on what y'all are working on and how we as a community can help to support. So, Brooke, I wonder if you wouldn't mind starting us off by giving us the elevator pitch for Success by Six.
Sure, absolutely. And first off, thank you for this opportunity, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you for elevating the topic about early childhood education and just shining light on the importance of investing early and also the struggles that families and childcare providers have faced this past year. So kind of recognizing the critical importance of the earliest years in a child's life and understanding that every parent needs support at some point. child and family advocates came together first in 2012 to form the Austin-Travis County Success by Six Coalition. And so the coalition consists of child and family advocates, providers, parents, policymakers, civic leaders, and experts, all kind of focused on strengthening early childhood systems and ensuring that every child enters kindergarten happy, healthy, and prepared to succeed in school and beyond. And so the United Way is the backbone organization and sees Success by Six as part of its collective impact work to fight poverty in our community. And so last thing, the Success by Six Coalition kind of focuses its work on 4 pillars: healthy beginnings, high quality early education and care, supportive families, and safe and stimulating communities.
That was a really great elevator pitch. It's concise. You had your points down. Thank you. I really
and there's a lot more, but I keep it.
I can only imagine, because there's so much that really goes into it. It's one of those things where it's like there are certain things that you can't approach one thing at a time because it's multiple things simultaneously. Yeah. And I think that's essentially a lot of what you're talking about, and why you need a coalition. One organization alone can't go it for the whole community. In which case, I'd like to ask, Michael, what role does the African American Youth Harvest Foundation play as a Success by Six coalition member?
Thank you so much for asking. Let me just say, first and foremost, I'm very happy to be here with you today. But our role is basically about addressing basic needs. How can we help address a lot of these systemic problems that our families are having? What can we do as a nonprofit in working through our network of partners, such as United Way and St. David's Foundation? But what can we do to address a lot of these specific needs within the African American community? And one is, our program Cradle to Contributor, starting with parents with infants all the way through college. What can we do? What are the basic needs? And one of the things that we did was we did a survey and a study, and we reached out to about 300 single mothers. And specifically, this particular effort was to focus on Black boys. What was going on with them? Because when you take a look at the data, what was concerned was more than half of these kids, when they reach the first grade, they're not ready. So what could we do as a nonprofit through this Success by Six model, working with our partners? What can we do to make sure that our kids are prepared? But the first thing we had to do was to listen to the families, to find out what are some of the basic needs. Because for any family, any child to be successful, the first thing is to find out what is needed. And by us, through the support of the City of Austin, being a social service provider, first thing we do when we talk to families, are your lights on? Your gas on? What problems are you having there? What about food? What about clothing? About technology? How can we help? And we ran into so many families with different issues. And basically, our staff, we roll up our sleeves and say, okay, there's no one shoe that fits all, no one model. It's individually hearing the pain of the families and the struggles, whether it be childcare, whether it be employment, whether it be food, whether it be transportation. What can we do? And when we began to hear all these problems, that's when we began to reach out to this network and saying, okay, we got family A here, family B here, family C here. There's need for this. And so basically what we have begun to do is to not only through our partner, be able to work with partners to, one, give out food, to assist with identifying, be it childcare, how to get them into childcare, lower cost. And then we have to also remember that we have unlicensed childcare caretakers in the communities. How can we assist them as well? Because there are many, many young parents that can't afford the average childcare cost, $700, $800, $900 to $1,000 a month, because they're probably only making, $2,000, $2,500 a month, so they can't afford that. So basically, they have to find somebody within their apartment complex, somebody that is on disability to take care of them And so we look to see what we can do. We give them HEB food cards. We get with those child care centers to find out what technology support. I'm happy to say that through some of our supporters within this network, we've been able to give out, tablets, early learning tablets that will help child from ages 0 to 6 to 7, with reading skills. I mean, shapes, sizes, colors, sounds, because you have some caretakers that we're running into that just don't have the technology. So with us being able to assist in that area there alone is paramount, and the parents love it. And our goal is not to see what we can do to move kids out of these so-called unlicensed childcare, but how can we strengthen those centers in these apartments, or Big Mama, Big Papa, give them the tools and resources that they need so that this child can be ready when they get ready for the first grade. So I know I'm all over the place, but I just want to share with you that.
No, I can see how all the things are directly connected. I really appreciate
And we have case managers and social workers and counselors that are there, and we assist with finding jobs. And so I'll pause, and I know I said a lot, but it's very much needed. And we are still giving away tablets. We'll be giving away tablets again next weekend after our vaccination efforts tomorrow. So let me pause.
Awesome. Well, all of that is so critical and so important. And one of the things you touched on there towards the end, you were talking about empowering people who provide childcare who aren't necessarily your traditional childcare providers. I really, really appreciate that. And I appreciate that when Ms. Gordon was on, she made reference to something that got me thinking about how she was talking about how we, in a time of deep need, we were able to recognize the value of our childcare and childcare provision, and it's one of those things where it's like, we really need to think about the people who got us through on the other side of this, the people who got us through when we couldn't have made it otherwise. And so thinking about childcare as this sort of critical component, and as an educational component, I mean, even if it's just, how to eat by yourself and go potty and all the other things that a lot of childcare providers teach our children, that's education as well. And so sort of shifting that mindset, it got me thinking, our preschool teacher didn't call her daycare a childcare center. She called it Miss Tony's, shout out to Miss Tony. She called it Miss Tony's Fun Learning Center. In which case she was definitely, already shifting parents' mindset towards thinking about this as a place where your child comes to learn about the world, as opposed to just a place where your child comes to, wait for you to get done working. So I really appreciate all of that. And that there's folks thinking about it, and that y'all are paying attention to families, basic needs. Not meeting your basic needs means you don't do things like, really strongly encourage and support your child's education, because you have to think about the basics. So I'm glad that y'all exist and that, people are thinking about the things that are so important. Brooke, I'd like to ask you, Success by 6 emphasizes that first 2,000 days of a child's life. What happens when that timeline gets rocked by a 365 plus day disruption like a pandemic?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the bottom fell out for a lot of families and also childcare providers. And I'm glad Michael mentioned family-based providers, because the Success by 6 Coalition isn't just working with center-based, but family, friends, and neighbors, because we recognize that's where kids are. And those family-based providers, they closed their doors at twice the rate as center-based providers during this pandemic. So there was a huge disruption to services for families and children. And when families can't have their kids in nurturing care, they can't be productive members of the workforce. So the two are really intertwined. Housing, childcare, workforce development are all tied together and all necessary for economic mobility and self-sufficiency. And so Success by 6 Coalition is really working hard to support both our center-based providers and family, friends, and neighbor-based providers with resources, And I have to say thank you to City Council and Mayor Pro Tem, because during this past year, with both the SAVES resolution, the $5 million, and the $1 million in emergency relief funds for childcare, I mean, that was a major lifeline to providers in our community. And, even though 30% of them have closed their doors, most of them that have stayed open cite those funds from the city for the reason that they were able to stay open. And so parents were able to keep their kids in safe, reliable, nurturing care during that time.
You said 30% closure. Were those permanent closures or temporary closures?
We've lost in Austin this past year 30% of our licensed capacity. So those kind of the seats have been closed, have been lost due to COVID. But and some closed temporarily and have since reopened. But to Michael's point, the family-based providers have been impacted even more severely through all that, because there just isn't that same connection to resources and supports, and that's something we're focused on and working hard to ameliorate.
So, then that gets me thinking about this, the next thing, we've got major issues like generational wealth chasm, environmental injustice that leads to worse health outcomes, lack of high quality childcare like we've been talking about, and disinvestment, frankly, in public schools. All of those challenges really disproportionately fall squarely on African American communities. And so I wonder how programs like Success by Six and groups like the Youth Harvest overcome those really serious and deeply embedded obstacles. And
one of the first things that I can say, truth be told, this pandemic really affected a lot of kids and families, because one of the things that we're definitely seeing is the fact that, kids' attention span, for the most part, can they sit on a computer, 4 to 6 to 8 hours a day? It's nothing like that in-person structure, in-person classroom time. And for kids to miss that, I think there is going to be a setback that we're going to have to overcome. I think more monies is going to have to be allocated to our schools so we can get in there and begin to work with the kids to turn them around, because we are seeing a deficit in grades. Kids that were performing, at an A or B, 9 out of 10 for the most part right now, they may be at a C or a D right now because they missed a lot of important time. And so to keep a child from following that trajectory, the bottom line is more resources. And I think it's going to be required to turn that around, because what we don't want to see is let this pandemic create a problem that perpetuates that prison to pipeline issue. And so you got to get in front of those kids that lost that important in-person classroom hours. I mean, it's critical. And so that's something that has to be looked at. An investment is going to have to be there, because kids that are not reading on a 3rd grade level should not be an indicator for how many prison bases they're going to build. This pandemic, really worked the number on our kids. And so what are we going to do different moving forward? Because it's definitely going to take an investment. We cannot say, the schools are going to have to say, okay, we're going to have to beef up our resources to bring these kids back up. But there's no way that based off of a 3rd grade reading score that the schools shouldn't be required to get them back on grade level, by the time they're in the 6th or the 7th grade. But we should not say it's okay that they continue on that pathway without putting some resources. So I'm glad this current administration is putting funding there, because COVID did not help the problem. It hurt. And there's a lot of teachers, that really are just not comfortable at the end of the day and going back into the schools right now, because they have a family. And so kids, some kids, and special kids with special needs, they, for the most part, some can't sit on the computer all day. And so what do we do about that? And how do we turn that around so that there is no loss in the kids are learning? So there's a lot of things that needs to be looked at, and then also one thing that I did learn is that, even in the school district that I'm working with, at one point in time, 73% of the families had lost a job were out of work, and that impacted everything. So
wow, 73%?
73%, yes, ma'am. 73% of the families had either lost or had reduced hours. And when things like that happen, it not only affects the household, but it affects the child. And there's going to have to be done to address this trauma that both the household, the parent, as well as the child face. And it's a reality. And so how do we get in front of it now? It's something that we have to think about. Food, it's needed. But at the end of the day, there's some impact that we have to realize and figure out what is it going to take in order to address it.
I really appreciate that. And that really, it offers me the opportunity to think about, I think in a lot of ways, there are so many systems that were so broken that, they were just one catastrophe away from actually just crumbling like dust to the ground. Yes. And I think there is a lot of really sort of unfortunate opportunity that presented itself in all the falling down around us to be able to start with the foundation and build it up strong. And so in thinking about our kids' education from that perspective, including a lot of families recognize, one, their kids need classroom education, but a lot of families also recognize that they do better with their kiddo at home. And I think that was a really beautiful opportunity for some families to really think through, kids have been experiencing, some issues with the public school system, and that's a great thing for a family to be able to learn about, how it works for them. That to say, you pointed out, that it can't work, even with a coalition, even with, lots of people at the table. It can't work without dedicated resources. And so I wonder, if given the opportunity, and I'll ask this of both of you, Brooke, you can start us off. What do you say to people like me, who get the opportunity to create policies that, that we can codify and make things, exist in perpetuity? What's the ask? What are those resources?
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy you asked. No, this kind of conversation kicked off because I was a conversation I had with Rosemary and your staff kind of on this exact topic. There was, the childcare system was fragile before the pandemic, and now it's on life support. And, there are federal dollars coming into Texas, and so there are real opportunities here. And so it's just making sure that we are strategic, thoughtful in how we invest those dollars for real sort of sustainable change that can strengthen these systems. And so families can access affordable, high quality care where they want it. And part of that is the family, friends, neighbors. How do we kind of do shared system and supports? We work right now with Avance and GAVA and help them kind of build up resources and connections for family child care providers so that they have the resources and the tools that they need.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So I'm familiar with GAVA, but what was the other one you said? Did you say Avance? Avance.
And they primarily work with Spanish-speaking family child care providers. The benefits cliff and families, there's just such inconsistencies with families receiving subsidies to afford childcare and then going back to work or losing those hours and then losing their subsidy, not being able to get their child back in a program so they can't go look for employment. So how can we there's a continuity of care. How do we support those families so that when their income changes slightly, they don't totally lose their subsidy and thus have to be paying the full cost of childcare. And often families pass up employment opportunities because of that, what we call the benefits cliff. And these are kind of, we know that these are the problems, we know what the solutions are, and now that there are dollars coming into the system, we're really hoping that we can begin to address those problems and make some dramatic changes that impact families. Michael mentioned, pre-K and a tablet, and public preschool enrollment has been way down this year. So really trying to encourage families. Enrollment for public pre-K is now open, encouraging families with eligible 3 and 4-year-olds to enroll, because child in a high quality pre-K setting for 2 years sets them up to be ready for kindergarten, and they're more likely to be reading at grade level by grade 3, and offers those families the supports and connection to resources through the public school system. So that's an opportunity. Really looking to help providers and increase access to quality care, looking for ways to partner with providing care in school campuses, so that childcare, infant toddler care is located to where families are already going to drop off their older kids. And so that kind of one-stop shop for resources. So the Success by 6, we've got kind of a plan and a list of ideas to implement, both kind of to build on existing programs and pilot new programs. Another area is for restaurant, hospitality, music industry workers that work non-traditional hours. There's only 5 licensed care families that take kids off kind of normal 9 to 5 work schedules. So how do we—
the whole city?
Yeah. And so how do we create—
Is that what you mean? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that are licensed, that are kind of licensed with the state, that are providing non-traditional care hours.
Wow.
So we build more of that, because the reality is most families are not working kind of a 9 to 5 and don't have predictable scheduling. And so how do we meet those needs? So those are all—
I just thought about, so my husband as a firefighter works a 24-hour shift. What do single parents who are firefighters do? What do EMS professionals and PD professionals, what our emergency services folks work some relatively non-traditional hours too.
Right. So they rely on friends and neighbors. So how do we make sure that those friends and neighbors are kind of connected to resources, understand kind of so really kind of raising up community voice, trying to connect to understand those needs better, so we can make sure that we are fulfilling those demands and supporting those families.
Well, this was your opportunity to tell me what you'd asked me to do, so I jotted down a lot of notes. Mr. Locke, how about you? Would you like to very quickly? We're closing in on our time, but I'd love to hear.
Okay. You know what, Mayor Pro Tem Madison, and you mentioned several things, and so did Brooke. One is when we talk about single parents. For the most part, I think we all know that about 70% of the African American families are, for the most part, are single parents, and so they don't have the luxury of being able to do homeschool, because 9 out of 10, most of them that we engage, they have to work 1 to 2 jobs, and that's a struggle. But I think one of the greatest things that could happen is if we looked at ways to get more PK childcare centers and here in Austin, because for the most part, there are wait lists everywhere, and it really benefits a single parent to be able to get a 3-year-old in and get the learning that they so desperately need. But at the end of the day, it's an economic deal for them as well, because if they, for the most part, are on a wait list, and I think just about everywhere you go, there is a wait list. And if we evaluate those wait lists and determine what can we do different as a community, we have schools that are not really being used to its fullest capacity, and especially in the Eastern Crescent, to where a lot of the schools are, for the most part, when you take a look at their performance and grades, hate to say it, but in the community area that I live in and grew up in for the most part, C, D, and F rated, what can we do in our community to change the academic outcomes? And I think one of the things that we can look at investing into is having more pre-K to where, one, it helps the parents, but two, it helps the child get the learning that they need. So by the time they get to the third grade, they are on the right track and not dependent upon a school to turn them around. So there's a lot of things that can be done that can help a single parent because they do not have the luxury for homeschooling.
Right. And that's really important that, as we're having these conversations, I think at the end of the day, we all keep coming back to, equity, and if the outcomes are bad for adults, the outcomes certainly aren't great for our children.
Yes.
I wish we had more time, but we are at the tail end of our time. So Mr. Lofton, CEO of African American Youth Harvest Foundation, and Brooke Freeland of United Way of Greater Austin, I'd really like to thank you both for joining me tonight.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so very much. I really enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure. Thank y'all. And
for all of your support.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Take care. Wow, that was good. That's a lot of information, really important, good information. Things that are cliche are very often things that are true. When we invest in our youth, we're investing in our future. None of us, not one of us, sprang into this world fully developed and ready to seize success. We're all a product of our environment. And it's a community-wide obligation to ensure that our environment isn't about exclusion, but about accessibility. If Black lives matter, then Black children matter. Understanding the institutional barriers that make the road to success steeper for those kids is the first step. Working to smash those barriers is what comes next. That does it for this week's installment of Talk with Tasha. We'll be back here live again on Friday, April the 30th. In the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns, you can always reach out to me through the District 1 office. That's District 1, DISTRICT, the number 1 at austintexas.gov. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and where you're able to, try to have a little fun. Bye, y'all.